Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Growers Not Showers, episode fuck knows what. We got myself, we got Mr. Cut Archer, and we got Lucas, actually, who is a very good friend of mine from osteopathy. He's one of my more highly regarded colleagues. And we've invited him on the pod today to talk a little bit about what osteopathy is and pick his brain a little bit. So, my first question to you, Lucas, is how did you actually get into osteopathy? What brought you into this sector?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure. What actually got me into osteopathy was a range of things. It wasn't like I'd been going to an osteopath all my life. Essentially, I was considering a few different degrees, but I'm a very social person, and the degrees that I had in mind were all sat behind a desk. So I'd considered like pharmacology, radiology, and none of these were really social. I myself have dyslexia. And my mother actually recommended osteopathy. She thought it'd be a good match. Did a few open days, and then I learned that like a lot of the assessments were practical, which is ideal for me, someone that's not as skilled with writing. Obviously, I've built those skills over the years. So I chose it, and throughout the years, I've fallen in love with it. I really, really enjoy it.
Yeah, I think one thing that me and Lucas were talking about literally half an hour ago was the beauty of osteopathy in the sense that every single practitioner can have different ideologies, but at the end of the day, we all treat patients the same way. So say, for example, myself, I'm a lot more rehab based and I tend to look into the evidence a bit more than other practitioners. Whereas, someone like Lucas might be a bit more clinical based where so for example, a technique that he's done in clinic has worked for him specifically, he's then more likely to do that with his patients. And the beauty of the sport is that there is no right or wrong answer, very similar to coaching, is that you need to have a general scope of understanding of the topic as a whole to then have the applicability of the knowledge where it needs be. So what would you say is like your sort of forward thinking or niche in terms of osteopathy? How would you approach a majority of your patients?
So I think what you said is like massively correct. And if it's okay, I'm going to touch on the link between coaching and bodybuilding and things of that nature in a little second. But I'd say for me, my main interests are nutrition, particularly supplements. I've done my dissertation on curcumin supplements effects on NeoWhey. I've been doing a little bit of reading into supplements for skin health, hair health, things of that nature. In terms of my approach, I'd say similarly to you, I'm very clinically based. I'm very safe with my case histories. I like to make sure safety is my number one priority. That's probably due to how I've been taught at Swansea University. And I'm definitely very hands-on. I like to work holistically, but also address the main area of concern. And I think you made a great point about how osteopathy and coaching are fairly similar, or very similar in that, each client or patient is an individual and they're going to have different needs, essentially, regardless of if they have the same complaint or the same goal. And for me, in my training, obviously, I like aesthetics, I like how they look, but my main goal is functionality. And I think that merges very well with bodybuilding because, as you guys have said on your previous podcasts, longevity is key. And whether that is having fluid movement when you're 60 or whether that is still being able to train at 60, I think it meshes and crosses over massively. And I think it is a real important thing, which is why over these last couple of weeks, I've really enjoyed learning about coaching, going into that aspect of osteopathy as exercise prescriptions and things of that nature are part of it. And yeah, it's just really, really good.
Yeah, I don't know if sorry, Jack, were you going to say something?
No, you're all good. Go for it, man.
Yeah, I don't know if I've spoke to you about this, but sort of like in terms of my direction of how I want to take my career in the future, I've been looking into somehow taking osteopathy into more of an online field. Obviously, osteopathy being very hands-on based, it makes it a bit more difficult than how we're going to tackle having online clients. So I think my trajectory is going to be tailored towards more like a PT, more exercise based. Obviously, I have the upbringing of an osteo, so I bring the holistic approach, structure governs function, etc., etc. Those ideologies will never leave me. However, for me to still be able to offer holistic treatment online, I've had to look into furthering my exercise rehab, etc., etc., and then tailoring that towards my clients. So that's sort of like what I'm going to be targeting more towards now that I've graduated, doing more CPD towards rehab and how I can have it influence my online presence. And the thing is with bodybuilding as well, that you got to understand, it's like when you take it to a high level, it is ridiculously demanding, and so is osteopathy physically. You know, you have certain clinics which will give you 10 to 15 patients a day, and if you're doing that 5 days a week, you will be burnt out very, very quickly. So the physical demand of osteopathy is there. And, you know, if you're not physically fit on a day-to-day basis, like if you're not in shape, osteopathy is going to be really hard for you to do. Like even just from a cardio perspective, having 10 to 15 clients, God forbid, they're all hips and legs. And like by the end of it, your arms are sore, your elbows are aching, you know, your knees are going. It's difficult from that sense. So, you know, I want to tailor more towards being online, not having that physical demand on my body, because I understand that bodybuilding is going to take, you know, 99% of that toll. But yeah.
What do you think, out of interest, Lucas, what do you think like osteopathy means to you? Because we did do a podcast about like osteopathy and what it means, and obviously the three of us understand what osteo entails, but I think a lot of people probably have the perception of like either they'll view it as like just physio, or they'll view it as just spinal stuff. So what does osteopathy kind of mean to you? Like how would you give it, I guess, an elevator pitch of what you do?
It's quite hard because like everyone I've spoken to that does osteopathy has given me their own understanding that is amazing in its own way. So it's hard to like justify it or summarize it in one. I'd say that essentially what we're doing is someone comes in with a complaint and we look at what is causing that complaint, not the direct area, but what has led to it. So I've had experiences where I've injured my ankle and I've been treated for my shoulder. Now, obviously, I think the big misconception with the whole holistic approach is that it sounds like my shoulder's been treated. But what's actually happened is I've had essentially my full posterior chain worked on to help correct rotational or side bending imbalances that may have occurred due to this shoulder injury, then had some work on the shoulder to help, you know, return my equilibrium and how my weight bearing is. So by me saying we're treating the area causing the problem, I don't mean, okay, my ankle hurts, it's my ankle. I mean the larger picture. So holistic approach, as I'm sure you guys have covered. But I think, especially where I struggle with this as well, but when people say, oh, you know, I've got back pain and I went to an osteopath and they treated my foot. Some people might just treat the foot, but also there is other areas of treatment that are being done on the body, potentially to the back as well. So yeah, just holistic based care. I know that wasn't the best summary, but yeah.
No, yeah. I was going to touch up on that, and it's like most people assume that osteopathy is very hands-on, and it is in nature. But I've had patients where I've simply talked them into getting better. I haven't even put my hands on them. So what osteopathy is to me is just a method of treating someone by looking at the bigger picture. This is why we're trained in so many different areas like nutrition, you know, general lifestyle, exercise, then the hands-on stuff as well, because it all comes together. You know, I see it almost as a circle, and there's multiple different factors that are playing into that person's well-being, and it's your job as an osteo to almost play the role of a detective and you to understand which area of their life is actually affecting them. Something that we practice quite a lot in osteopathy is the biopsychosocial model, as Jack is aware of, we've spoken about a lot before, and it's the influence of the influence of the psychological and sociological state of the client that it has on their physical state. So say, for example, you know, we know by the literature, if someone is more stressed, they are way more likely to get injured. You know, whether there is an actual imbalance in musculature or whether they got injured simply because of the fact that they were stressed. You know, there are people who are really injury aware, you know, do specific exercises to prevent injury, etc., etc., etc. They're doing everything right, but they still get injured. And it's like, how do you answer that question? Well, it's because there are so many factors that actually play into the bigger picture of them getting injured. One of them being their psychological state, you know. So that's something that as osteopaths we do, is we play the role of a detective. And another thing as well is with the consultation, with osteopathic consultations, we have quite a lot of time. which means that we actually have more time than other healthcare practitioners like GPs to screen for things that are even outside of our scope. I'll give a prime example. We might have a patient in clinic who's presenting with X, Y, and Z systemic symptoms, let's say shortness of breath, heart palpitations, etc. Say they had gone to a physio or a chiro, they might not have picked that up and referred to the correct practitioner, but we can, because we have that extra time and we have that extra caution, and we're taught to have that extra caution. So we can then signpost to people who are able to help that person. So it is a very holistic approach in that sense. You know, we understand what we can treat, but we also understand what we can't treat, and we understand who can help them, so we can always refer them if needs be.
So Lucas, kind of, sorry, there's a bit of a tangent, but I'm interested to know, with kind of like your own training, your own gym work, is that something that you are still very, very engaged in, or it's kind of like osteo taking your heart and it's kind of fallen as like, what's the appropriate phrase, it's less of a priority, or kind of like, what does that look like for you personally with your own training?
I think they merge quite well. I think osteopathy is definitely my passion. It's what I enjoy, but I also do really, really enjoy building my physique and progressing in the gym and in life. So it's quite, say, a tough question in that I like them both, but I think osteopathy is definitely my passion. And I've learned to love it over the years. Like, it wasn't always smooth sailing, but very fortunately they merge quite nicely together. And through talking to Camille, I've only just met you today, but I'm sure you've got loads and loads of knowledge. But through talking to Camille, he's taught me a lot of things about different exercises. We have talked previously about rehabilitation. So it's really, really interesting. And as of recent, it has massively piqued my interest. And I've actually been doing quite a bit of research into it in terms of like the glycemic index, glycemic load. I've been looking about, I guess, longevity of bulks and how to reduce like excessive fat cell gains. Sorry, I forgot the word for it there. But yeah, so I think right now it's definitely taken an interest or control over my interests. But I am adamant to maintain osteopathy and continue learning it. And I think learning about exercise rehabs or taking my interest for coaching to exercise rehab is a good way of me maintaining that interest in osteopathy as well as in coaching.
Is there anything within like the hypertrophy space or within your own training that has kind of, or anything from osteo that you've kind of seen and built into your own training? Maybe anything, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like, I don't know how much you keep up with like trends within the industry away from osteo, more into like hypertrophy training, but is there anything that you think people do incorrectly or should do more of, particularly as someone who is, well, a very good osteo trying to maintain good joint integrity and physical health while also building a physique?
Thank you very much for the compliment. I do appreciate it. So one thing that I've actually been interested in recently, like really interested in, is I've seen it a lot before and I've just thought, you know, it looks a bit funny, but it's exercise with movement. So I've been seeing a lot of like people with kettlebells and like juggling them, I guess. So like you're throwing it around, catching it, doing all of this. Rope flow, so the use of a rope to improve like your full body fluidity, and how that can affect you. And have you seen them like where people hold those maces and they like so I've gained a real interest in movement and how to improve it and maintain your longevity, as well as a key interest of mine at the moment is improving bone density. And that's something I want to like do a bit of research into the future. And in the next coming year, I'm going to experiment myself through my nutrition and my training with it. What about yourself?
I think because I'd say my training kind of definitely skews more towards like very traditional hypertrophy training. I think the biggest thing is understanding even small things about like your anatomy and physiology, like knowing roughly, even knowing like something like your carry angle exists, like the amount of time I see people who are doing like very narrow straight bar curls or push downs, and they'll be like, my wrist, shoulder, elbow hurt, and you look at like their natural carry angle and it's like ridiculous, and it's like you're just like not accounting for that in any capacity. So I think things like that are more so, I think probably more so from like an exercise selection and joint alignment perspective, or looking at like where people develop knee issues because they're like a really strong hack squatter or Smith squatter, stabilized squatting patterns, and then you ask them to do like a bodyweight squat, you ask them to do like a lunge, and it's just piss poor. And it's like, yeah, your stability across your entire lower body, not just your hip, not just your ankle, the entire fucking thing is woeful. So I'd say that's probably more where I kind of, where that balance is to me, more like probably 60% traditional hypertrophy with a few spins in there to kind of look after myself. But I like where your head's at, in that I think a lot of people are almost scared to go into those movement patterns that are less familiar. And it's like, if you break down what's going on, all you're doing is just applying a concentric and an eccentric to various different joint actions. And if you do that progressively and you do it with appropriate overload, you're going to grow muscle. You know, I think it's very easy to get caught up in like, the only way to do things is in this form or that form, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think so that some of the research I've been doing has kind of pointed that out, in that if you have stimulus on soft tissue, you're getting enough rest, you're getting enough nutrition, you are going to grow.
Yeah.
But I feel like obviously it's different for you guys as bodybuilders. You want to be as optimal as possible to get as big as possible. But just because something isn't optimal doesn't mean it won't cause stimulus, and doesn't mean it won't cause growth. It will just be a bit slower, but what you sacrifice in growth, you might gain in, say, stability if you have hypermobility in your shoulders, like you were saying. And I think where traditional training lacks is that there is a lot of stability. So like if you're doing, say, a press straight up, your scapula fixed. But when you're doing your full arm range of movement, your clavicle, your scapula, and your humerus are all moving at the same time, and they all have to do separate movements. So by fixing that, if you go to do something overhead and it's not directly overhead, it's a bit awkward. And I think that is what's interesting. But it's exactly as you said, it is the same core principles, in that you're just going into those ranges of movement and strengthening, and then that way you're reducing your risk of injury and other activities.
I think there's a bad trend in hypertrophy training for focusing on, like, I don't have a better way to phrase it, but I call it like monoset hypertrophy versus like polyset hypertrophy, where people's approach is like, okay, if I've got one set, what's the most ideal way I can create stimulus? And they'll be like, okay, make it as stable as possible, make it as loadable as possible, and make it as lengthened as possible. It's like, yeah, sure, if you had one set and the idea was with that one set, grow as much as you can off it. But we don't do that. We do multiple sets, and then we rest, and we come back and do it again, and we do that for weeks, and we do that for months. And I think if you inherit that training style of like, okay, every set I'm trying to get just growth maximally, you're trading off something else. And I think, like you said, even, you know, people talk about, like, I don't like using the word, but like this kind of the optimal as being something where they're like, okay, per set, what's the best growth I can get out of it? And realistically, I think you have to look at, okay, let's say you do go 100% hypertrophy. If you can only do that 6 months of the year, you're literally getting the same as being 50% hypertrophy for a full year. And so even if you scale back to like 70 or 80%, right, if we're kind of making up percentages here, but hopefully it illustrates my point. Like if you trade off a little bit of growth with each of your sets and you're growing at 80% of what you could be, if you can do that for years on end, you're just going to make more progress than the people who are going 100% and then getting injured and then having to, you know, take X amount of time off or rehab X muscle every single time, or sorry, X joint. And I think it's a smart approach to say, well, if I can have a plan that I know I can run pretty much forever, and I can progress it pretty much forever, then I'm going to grow forever, you know?
I think as bodybuilders, we have to become really, really, really good at a specific set of movements. And I can count on probably my hands and toes how many exercises totally I do in the gym every single week. But the point is, I do them every single week for 6 months, a year, 2 years, however many years on end, half a decade. So we become really, really good at these movements. We also got to understand the adaptation that's occurring in your body to then become really good at those movements. And the majority of movements in the gym are working a sagittal plane. But you got to understand there are 3 different planes of movement in the body. Now, a lot of people, like including myself, actually, this is how I learned about, I've been rehabbing myself. I spoke about what's going on with my hip before. But doing like almost two-dimensional rehab, like doing direct stretches for muscle rather than stretching a specific movement. One thing that I found a lot of success in is what Lucas, you were saying earlier, is doing like multifunctional patterns, doing a lunge with an overhead reach, doing a side lunge, for example, these sort of patterns, which I find much more beneficial. Muscles are not one-dimensional, they're two-dimensional. So you got to understand, in order for a muscle to fully, truly relax, we need to challenge it in all different ranges of motion, not just the specific range of motion that the muscle has its action in. I'll give a good example. It's like piriformis. Piriformis at 90 degrees turns into an internal rotator, but it relaxes an external rotator. So it's like depending on where your leg is, it's going to challenge the piriformis in a different way. Now, a lot of people do the piriformis stretch where they just do this, where they put their leg over here and they squeeze their thigh down, which is good. But then people don't get the response that they want from it. That piriformis doesn't relax. It goes back to being the way it was before, because albeit you're challenging it in this one range of motion, this one position, when you then go back to your normal function, standing up, it then just goes back to being how it was before. You need to challenge it in multiple ranges of motion in order for it to actually relax properly. Which is like how I've directed my knowledge in terms of rehab. I think it's beautiful how deep rehab actually is, and like how many different exercises there are. I was talking to one of my clients because I was trying to make an exercise library for like rehab exercises, but there's literally probably about 200 exercises I can think of the top of my head, and those are just the ones that I know, let alone the countless other variations of different exercises. There are so many different ways of going about it, even more so with than osteopathy, I mean, you could argue there are different ways of doing different techniques, but at the end of the day, we have the bread and butter, the soft tissue, the mobilization, the HPTs, fascial work, neural work, etc., etc. But we're kind of limited to that tool set. Whereas with exercises, there are so many different ways you could approach and target the exact same thing.
Yeah. Out of interest, Lucas, is there anything within osteo that maybe opinions that you have, it's fine if not, but opinions that you have that maybe people would view as a hot take, or things that you I won't layer the question yet, anything that you think would, doesn't need to ruffle feathers too much, but just anything that you think you maybe slightly differ on compared to other osteos?
So obviously I haven't met every osteo in the world, so I couldn't tell you, but I think, like, from doing my dissertation, I think that there's a lack of nutritional advice given in the community. So like there was a study done and it was only done on the first 1 to 2 appointments. Now for me, I used the one specific to OA because that's what my dissertation was on. So I don't actually remember the other like treatment modalities or the other conditions that it was being used for. Before OA, it was like the bottom used in terms of treatments. And OA is a progressive condition, so it should be implemented as soon as possible. So my research was to show that it was safe and that it could be done. So I think nutrition, I'd say is widely disregarded, or not disregarded, but there isn't enough of an emphasis on its importance as other treatment modalities, such as soft tissue. And I think it is very important because, especially if you have a client or a patient who is very much like, just make me better, I just want to be better, they don't really engage in it. By you giving them even just, take a tablet of curcumin, see how you feel, come in for the appointments, you're then subconsciously getting them to engage in their own rehab, because it's something easy, it doesn't take them any time, and it's something they will do. And I assume that you do the same with your coaching, certain supplements you can take, and then I feel that allows them to take their rehab and their progression, whatever it is they're doing, into their own hands, both at home or when they're in the clinic or on call with you. So I think nutrition, I'd say, is slightly underutilized in the osteopathic community.
I'm going to say a little hot take, and I'm sorry to any of my osteopath colleagues that listen to this. Before I say this, I'm going to sound like a traitor, but I think in osteopathy, soft tissue and manual therapy in itself is put as this holy grail, like it is going to help, you know, all of your patients, and that's just sadly not the case. You know, I really sound like a physio now. I hate it, but there is time and place to do soft tissue and manual therapy, and it does benefit a lot of patients in many, many ways. However, understand its applicability. If it doesn't work for some patients, which inevitably it will, you need to have other skills in your arsenal in order to get them better. aka your patient handling. How are you on the biopsychosocial aspect? Are you actually truly uncovering why they got their injury, what's preventing them from getting better, etc.? Have you got the rehab, you know, skill set? Are you able to prescribe exercises? From Lucas's point of view, nutrition, is that something that they're struggling with? Are they struggling with sleep? Are they struggling with hydration, etc., etc.? There are so many factors that encompass their well-being and health. And as an osteo, you need to understand when to apply what concept when one doesn't work. It's very, very similar to coaching. You know, we have high-level athletes. There's something that I spoke about in my story today. We have, you know, high-level athletes, and there are certain concepts that we need to apply to them that we wouldn't apply to a beginner athlete. When something works, we don't need to apply anything else because it works. When it doesn't work, that's when it's on you as a practitioner or a coach or whatever to have the knowledge to be like, okay, this didn't work, so let's try this. This didn't work, so let's try this. You have options. You have plan A, B, C, and D, and you're giving them the opportunity to choose which one they want to go down, you know?
Just to kind of counteract that a little bit.
Good, I like this. It's great.
Here we go.
Go for it.
No, but I agree what you're saying, but I think that's what osteopathy is. I think to say that any technique or any treatment modality is better than one is wrong, because if everything is patient-based, then one treatment modality for someone isn't going to be good compared to another one. So therefore, I think they're all equal, rather than one is on a pedestal. I get what you're saying, because I think a lot of people come in expecting to either be adjusted or to have tissue work. But that is the role of an osteopath, is same as a coach, is to see between the lines and what is necessary. And obviously not everyone is going to listen to you, not everyone is going to do what you say, but it's to suggest it to the patient, explain to the patient, which is why we have those long appointment times, as to why we think it will benefit them, and then let them implement it, and obviously let us implement it. So I think I agree, but I disagree that it's like put up here. I think they're all equal, and I agree in that you do need to have those skill sets, and that me myself is what I'm trying to build now, is my like exercise rehab. So listening to Jack talk about how he would adjust, say, a squatting format based on someone's ankle pain, knee pain, to me that is amazing. Like, I'm currently learning about that now, because on our course, I'm sure Camille will agree, very safety based, assessment based, also treatment based. But now that we've finished, it is really, really exciting, because I'm getting to learn all of these things, and just hearing you talk about it is really inspirational. And yeah, I think it's amazing, and I look forward to learning about it in the future. But how did you kind of get into coaching, and how did you start leveling up your coaching?
Was that for me or for Camille?
For you, Jack.
Oh, for me. I got into coaching it's always a weird question when people ask me, like, when did I get into coaching, because it's kind of a weird timeline. So my background initially, long time ago now, was computer science. I was doing my A-levels.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't know this. All right, let me look in.
I built my own computer. I know a shit ton about computers. That was my original interest. Yeah, bro. Like, mate, fucking deep into it. I made at uni, we had a drinking game, and I made an app for it. So we all had the drinking game app, and it had like custom cards and shit. It would push it to a server and everything, mate. I had the whole fucking thing now. Anyway, long time ago now. But when I was going through my A-levels. My A-levels were graphic design, physics, and computer science. It was fucking horrible. And at the time, I was getting into the gym quite heavily, and I literally would buy my mates' textbooks off them for like A-level PE, or I'd be like, when you next get one, buy me, like, I'll pay you to get another one. And I started like basically trying to self-teach A-level PE to myself, which distracted me heavily from my other A-levels. But yeah, and then I did go to uni for comp sci and then immediately pulled out and was like, I'm not doing this. Went and did sports fitness and coaching. And I picked one that touched on, they had a biomechanics module, nutrition module, and a sports psychology module, which was like, I'm sold. Wrapped that up and then did the PT project biomechanics mentorship, which was great. And then just kind of surrounded myself with smart people and got coached by people who know a lot about like human anatomy and physiology. And here I am with Camille as well, and Camille still, there's a shit ton more than me in terms of rehab, which is why he's here, and obviously like detailed anatomy. Like I can run you through a decent level of crap, but like you know, I'd never like, you know, I knew what patellar tendonitis was, but I wouldn't know like what scapular dyskinesis was until I really started talking to Camille and a close mate of mine, James Bees, who has a I forget the specific degree, but like physio or physio adjacent basically was what he did. And yeah, but the main thing that got me into coaching is, to cut a very long story short, really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. Never had amazing genetics. I enjoyed my progress, but I enjoyed giving other people more progress. It was requested by a few mates because as I got deeper and deeper into training, I realized I have horrific digestion and I had to really look into nutrition to work around that. My health markers would skew a little bit, even like naturally, and so I'd have to like look into them and run my bloods, and I would get injured all the time. Like I've spoken to a fair few osteos, and we think my mom has a similar issue. She's into her running. We think I have some kind of potential like connective tissue disorder. I just get tendonitis really quite easily. So it was kind of like a necessity for me. I was like, even when I would go to coaches, I would be like, hey, look, I need us to do this and cover these things and think about these things because my body doesn't really enjoy what I'm putting it through. And so that kind of bred the need for more knowledge, because if I didn't really think about my body, my digestion, my blood glucose, my blood pressure, my organ health or my anatomy, I just get absolutely fucked. So yeah, to cut a long story short, basically, I've been told a fair few times by different osteos, they're like, you're not made for bodybuilding. I've been like, yeah, well, you know, keep on moving.
Oh, that's amazing. And in a way, I guess it's like a blessing in disguise because it kind of helped you learn about that. And did you find once you improved your nutrition that injuries reduced and things of that nature?
Yeah, the biggest thing I think for injuries with myself is like digestion, like monitoring and having good digestion, which is really like, I have to be very specific with meals and meal timing and even fluid timing, but sleep, digestion and stress, basically just anything that would cause any level of inflammation. As soon as that would occur, like there was just no way around it, like I was going to get injured. But I also like played around with like throwing money and tons of money into like anti-inflammatories. Like I think, what was the most I ever did? I think I did like a couple grams of fish oil, like mega dosing calcium, vitamin D and C, curcumin, TBJP join-in, which already had a lot of overlap with like what I was already taking, the Strom support, joint support, and glucosamine, various different types of glucosamine, and CBD all at once, like ridiculous amounts of money, and just like nothing. Like if the training and the food and the stress and the sleep are not dialed in, fucked. Like I can't like buy my way out of that. And so yeah, probably injured like every joint at least once. But it definitely is a blessing because like it forces me to be smarter. The way that I think about it, I'll finish my yap and I'll let you talk. The way that I think about it is like, if most people train like twats, they find out in like 5 years, right? If I train like a twat, I find out in 5 minutes. So it's not really like I'm any different. I just get quicker feedback.
Mm.
And so it kind of stops me from developing a real, like, I've never torn anything. I don't think I'm capable of it, because I'd get tendonitis a million miles before I would ever get like any kind of partial tear. So yeah, it definitely was a blessing in disguise. I've no qualms with it at all.
Yeah, and I think like the nutrition is amazing. There's a book, I can't remember the name, but it's on the gut-brain biome, and kind of touched on how Camille talked about psychology and how your nutrition can actually massively affect that. But I also think that, you know, as you were saying, you're on all these supplements and nothing, right? So for one, glucosamine, don't take it, it's rubbish. There's no, the NHS used to prescribe it. They don't do it anymore because there's not enough evidence on it. Simple. But I think a lot of people are overly obsessed with taking a supplement, thinking that it's going to be some kind of miracle. And that's not the case. For one, all the supplements you're taking, they are more bioavailable if you eat them through food, through diet. Now you can get specific fish oil tablets. You can get these that are made from fat, so they specifically I guess excrete into your stomach, so they are betterly bioavailable, but it's never going to beat food. So you know, it's amazing that you learned it through actually doing it. But yeah, I think supplements are only there to improve when you're doing well. So you should always try and do the right things first, and then to up your game, take them. And you know, Camille, I remember Camille talking to me like that when you were coaching him during his cut, because I'm planning on starting my own social media, and that's one thing I want to do is take different supplements and record how they make me feel. And I remember talking to Camille when he was on his cut, and he was explaining to me, look, supplements aren't the answer to, you know, improving. You've got to do everything right first, and then they'll add a little bit on top. So yeah, I think it's very cool, and it's very cool that you trialed it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you said, the first question people always say when they get injured is like, what should I take? I'll be like, it's kind of I've got a bit of an aggressive analogy for it. It's kind of like you've been shot, you got a gunshot wound, and you're going to put a plaster over it. Yeah. It's like, it doesn't really address the underlying issue. Like, clearly, like, injuries as a blanket statement, injuries should not be happening, or should not be happening frequently. And it's like, if you have an issue and you supplement your way through it, and you continue to, even if you pull back on training and then just progress right back to where you were, you move in the same manner, the same volume, the same frequency, the same lifestyle factors, the same stress load, etc., you're just going to end up in the same thing. Like, if the input variables are the same, you're going to get the same output. And it doesn't matter what supplements you take, because they just physically aren't going to stop you from putting excess strain on a joint, a tendon, a ligament, whatever it is. I see a lot of people with like hugely excessive ranges of motion, like going so far into ranges of motion that they can't reach themselves. They're just getting pulled into it, and then they'll get out of it and be like, ow, everything hurts, and then try and slam some supplements and hope that that kind of recovers them for the next time, and then try and do it again but heavier. And like, you know, I think, yeah, definitely you can't supplement your way out of it, but people want to kind of like keep on doing what they're doing and not address it. And there's a bit of a perception of like, I guess recovery means rest or full rest, and they're like, oh, I don't want to do that because I'll lose muscle or whatever. So
yeah, like, people like think recovery is the answer to an injury. I did a reel about this recently. Like, a lot of people will just get injured and rest for 1 week, 2 week, whatever, until they feel a bit better, and then go back to the gym. But they don't understand how much of a risk they are at to get injured in the same tissues again. From like a biological perspective, you know, the actual collagen fibers haven't remodeled properly, but also from, you know, a psychological perspective, where they haven't actually addressed the root cause of the problem. You know, they might be fear avoiding of certain movements, or they might be fear confronting of certain movements. They're like, oh no, I rested so I can go back to doing exactly what I was doing before, and bang, they get injured. It's like one of the most common like things I need to address with people when it comes like to injury, you know, injury prevention, is understanding that rest isn't the answer to an injury. It's just the beginning. It's to get you out of pain, to then provide you with the correct protocols and challenge your body. And the key word is challenge. The same way that you challenge your body to build tissue, you need to challenge your body to make adaptations in order to prevent that injury from coming back again. It's very, very similar, the premise of rehab to hypertrophy or strength training, just less. And it's same like, progressive overload over an extended amount of time. We start with lighter movements, one-dimensional movements, we then progress to two-dimensional heavier movements, and then finally we return to sport, for example. But you're progressively overloading, you're incorporating more muscle groups, you're incorporating more movement patterns, yada, yada, yada. You're doing more at the time, but you don't want to do too much too soon.
Yeah, exactly. Are there any kind of common mistakes, Lucas, that you see across like general injury prevention or rehab that other than people trying to just supplement their way out of it, that you see?
Gosh, I might need to think on that one, but I think what Camille said is true. So like your average range is like 2 to 4 days where you should rest. So that's like the original destruction phase where your inflammation occurs. But then, as you rightly said, you do need to get back into it, because as also you've previously mentioned in your rehab video, when collagen is being laid down, you want it to be laid down in a way you're going to use it. If you hold your arm flat down for 2-3 weeks, that's how it's going to heal. So in the same way that motion is lotion for joints, you need to keep moving during your rehab. That doesn't mean you need to stack on like 4 plates and just go on a bench press. It's same as everything. It's about gradual return. In terms of like things that I see or patients that I see that might need to, or the common mistakes, it's not, I can't think of any, unless like a patient bluntly just doesn't do the exercises or doesn't do the stretches, and they just come in like, oh, my hamstrings are tight, I need a rub, and I'm like, did you do the stretches? No. Well, there you go. I've been blessed to not have patients that have been too confrontational in a way.
Yeah.
So no, I wouldn't say so. I think training wise, I was actually talking to Camille about this the other day, because a lot of my interest in coaching, rehabilitation has come from me getting injured a lot. And not in the gym. I actually feel stronger, more secure than ever in the gym. But it's when I do sports or when I do things that are not gym related, I seem to be getting injured more often. And that's where I've kind of pivoted in my training. And we were talking about the use of exhalation during like presses or contractions. And one thing that I'd like to touch on, that obviously, it helps with the transverse abdominis, you're activating the intraspinal muscles like your multifidus, and it's great, but it also helps activate your parasympathetic nervous system by breathing out. And, if whoever's listening or you guys yourself, I don't know, but for me, when I do a leg day and I'm bracing hard, I come out of the gym thinking like, that was it. I don't know if I can hit the clutch. I don't know if I can go. But then like the last few weeks, I've been experimenting with my breathing, and I've just been walking out of the gym relaxed because I've been exhaling, releasing that stress. And I think if you're training in the evenings, it could be quite nice. I mean, I'd see how it goes. I don't know if you guys have experienced that at all.
Yeah,
100%. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, there's a great coach out there, Josh Carr. Shout out Josh, Coach Carr on Instagram, and I've had a few like consultations with him, talking to him about like injury stuff and just kind of picking his brains. And one of the first things he always talks about is like, I forget the exact phrasing he uses, but he's like, most people can't actually breathe properly in the gym, or they don't understand breath. And he's like, I remember he was like talking about, you can see a lot of like transformations, like even just like he'll take on a bodybuilder and you'll see their lat spread transform, and people be like, oh my god, what did you do? And he'll be like, less volume and more breath work, like the same amount of time in the gym, and literally just being able to like stack your rib cage correctly, or control your scapula correctly, or being able to even just control your diaphragm correctly, the carryover that has posturally to be able to bias different tissues comfortably in a pain-free way, like the carryover is fantastic. I definitely think breath is very, I was going to say overlooked, but it kind of isn't. It's looked at in the wrong way. Like, you see people mouth taping, nasal stripping before bed, and like before sets. I remember there was a big trend of people being like, breathe through your mouth, get yourself sympathetic, and then when you're done with your training, breathe through your nose, get yourself a bit more parasympathetic. But I don't think people actually think about, you know, well, just how sympathetic are you getting yourself, and is there a benefit to that? I mean, particularly like you mentioned there, a leg day, potentially an off season or a gaining phase, where you can get so sympathetic you can kill your appetite or your sleep. It's just not going to be that productive, and you have to ask yourself, why are you getting that sympathetic for everything? You know?
Yeah, I agree. And I think especially when you're doing, like, if you're in an off season and you're doing these big heavy movements, you're already placing loads of load on your spine, which is going to knacker your nervous system. So if you're then bracing as well, you're almost reducing the amount that you could do in the gym. In a way, like I did watch a video on talking about like muscle building and like the best exercises, and you know, heavy presses are great, especially when you're sure I'm repeating things that you guys have already said, but like when you're in a cutting phase, because it sends that stimulus to the muscle that it needs to be there, rather than losing it when you're cutting. But they also do tire out your nervous system massively. So, you know, I don't know, but that could be one way to help reduce that strain on the body. Yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I like it. I think there's applications for everything. I think, you know, the same way I wouldn't want someone to be sympathetic during the entirety of their session, the same way I wouldn't want someone to be parasympathetic throughout the entirety of their session. I think there's good time to have a play with both. But I mean, even like, I don't know if you guys can relate to this at all, but like maybe like music changing as you go throughout a session, like what I'm listening to at the end of like an upper session when I'm doing like side laterals or some kind of bicep tricep work, the music that I listen to in order to achieve failure or close to is drastically different to, like, I don't know, getting under a barbell and pressing it overhead or whatever. Like, there's, you know, not always that need to be like driving up your nervous system to such a ridiculous extent for a movement that like you can just kind of fairly comfortably reach failure on, particularly if it's like a longer duration set. So absolutely, I can see that being a huge benefit. I think the one thing I would say is probably for people who are newer to the gym, I think it's good to embrace the difficulty and challenge. We're probably talking a bit more further along people who have an ability to be able to train hard, and to an extent where it is counterproductive, and that's where having that pullback. So for the three of us, I'd say it definitely carries. But if you talk to little Jack 8 years ago, you know, I'd say he probably just needs to try harder.
Yeah, there's a lot of regional interdependence between shoulder pathologies and shoulder issues and people who are chest breathers, because of, if you think about the musculature around the diaphragm, obviously we've got the diaphragm itself, but we also got the intercostals, we've got serratus anterior, and more upper, we've got pec minor. Now, if there's rib dysfunction in this region because they're being overworked, because the transverse abdominis is not working properly and they're chest breathing, all these muscles are much more likely to get strained. And we know how important, Lucas can agree with me, the pec minor, serratus anterior is to having optimal shoulder health. Those two muscles are probably the biggest contributor to having rounded shoulders and being like this. Now, if you have someone who's a chest breather and they go to press, they have a difficulty opening up because all these muscles are really tight. They're not breathing properly. So then what happens? They end up excessively rounding their lower back. And then, you know, it's just a chain of events. So going back to what Lucas was saying about the musculature here, it is so fucking important to teach people to breathe properly. And I completely agree with that, coach, what you were saying, Jack. You know, it's probably one of the first things I teach people to do is like how to breathe properly. Ever since I had that injury of my lower back when I was deadlifting, I don't lift with a belt anymore. And I'm not scared to. In fact, I'm more confident to lift without a belt now. And I've lifted more weight now without a belt because I've learned to brace and breathe properly, and I feel I have that 360 leverage around my waist rather than having it, two-dimensional, just activating my abs and activating my my erectors.
Yeah.
So when you've got correct movement, everything grows better, everything feels better. Getting stronger is easier. I think that's one thing I kind of want people to take away from this is like, if you're moving correctly in a way that's healthy for your body, you're just going to be stronger because you're able to run lifts for longer, and you're not having to, for lack of a better word, almost fight your own anatomy to get things to move, or constantly causing yourself minor disruption across various areas or particular areas by trying to force your body to do something it doesn't really want to do, or even just kind of misaligning. Like, if you are moving in a way that your body is happy to move and directly resisting load, your ability to move load is improved, and that leads to greater growth.
Yeah, and I also just had a thought, and you'll have to forgive me. Like, I know I've just graduated, I should probably know this, but like, in terms of the anatomy, right? Your pec minor, your serratus, I'm not 100% sure, but I know they help with breathing, right? I can't remember if it's inspiration or expiration specifically. So a way of thinking about it potentially is that if you are a chest breather, you take that big breath in, your ribs are moving, and you're moving your shoulders. As we know, the serratus attaches to the shoulder blade. It could affect your range of movement and how you're moving. So if you're breathing through the stomach, you're essentially freeing up these muscles and allowing them to work in synergy with the rest of your body. I don't know, just a thought I had while you were saying that.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said, like, those two muscles are very, very big contributor to shoulder pathology in the gym specifically. Like, AC impingement or supraspinatus impingement is probably one of the most common things I see, and it's predisposed by tightness in said muscles. And a lot of people don't know there's two pec muscles. A lot of people are like, oh, clavicular head and sternal head, and like, that's one muscle. And a lot of people don't even know what serratus anterior is, and they don't know how to stretch it, more importantly. So it's when you actually develop an understanding of these things, it's like giving, fire to a caveman. They're like, oh my god, what the fuck is this? Like,
to be fair, I actually don't know how to stretch the serratus. Could you give us a demonstration, Camille?
So pin off the ribs here,
Yeah.
drive the shoulder forward like that.
Oh yeah, because it is the punching muscle.
Exactly. So you pin off the ribs just below where your pec minor would be. So I think it's rib 3 to 6.
3 to 5 is pec minor.
3 to 5.
Oh, yeah, it'd be 6 for just below.
Yeah.
That's nuts level of anatomy knowledge. Knowing which particular ribs it inserts and originates at is fucking impressive. Impressive knowledge.
So you'll be
drilled.
I'm sure you'll be in humble.
Calma.
All right, well, we're running a little bit thin on time, but Lucas, you obviously mentioned like potentially going onto social media and some stuff, so I'll get you to promote that in a sec. But is there any main takeaways or anything that you kind of want to? I put a lot of pressure on you now. Is there anything that you want to like kind of have people take away from the podcast or from kind of anything that you've learned?
So there's a lot of things that I've learned, and it's honestly through trial and error. So, if you're thinking about doing something in the gym, you're not sure if it works or not, just do your research and try it out. Because like for me, with this functional stuff, I'd see it all the time and I'd be like, yeah, okay, like, I don't know. And then I started doing my research and I realized, there is actual substance to what people are saying online. There is papers, and it does work. And I'm starting to implement it into my life. And yeah, I just think do your research. So if you hear me, Jack, Camille say something, likely it is correct. We've got our credentials, but research it yourself and find out. Don't take anyone's word for gospel, but always listen to what they're saying. And I think that's the best way to progress and learn in the gym, because you're only going to learn something once you do it. And takeaways, I think that I have gained a real appreciation for coaching. over these past couple of weeks. I think I'm definitely considering getting a coach and seeing how it will change and adapt to my training. Because I think, as I said, that's the best way to learn, is just to do something. And yeah, like I've been watching your videos. I think they're quite good. Obviously, I haven't seen all of them. I watched the one on your hip, and I know we've talked about that before in clinic. No, it's been quite a nice experience. I've really enjoyed it, honestly. I'd definitely like to come on again. It's been great, and it's a lot less scary than you think it is, you know. So yeah, it's been really fun.
The chat with the boys.
Is there anything you want to promote at all, Lucas? Anything in the pipeline or that you've got at the minute?
To be honest, like we only just got like our results a couple of weeks ago, and I've been working, so I haven't actually started. But I'm gonna make a YouTube channel. I might be doing a session in the gym with Camille, so I don't know, maybe watch out for that. Yeah. Yeah, no, nothing I've started as of yet, but there will be stuff to come. Yeah, I'm
on the rate. We'll promote you. Don't worry.
Appreciate it.
Get you on again.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. It's lovely to meet you, Jack. And yeah, like I'm really looking forward to the future, and like kind of experimenting with those exercises that I mentioned at the start, like the kind of mobility stuff. So yeah, it's been amazing.
Beautiful stuff, man. Thank you for coming on. For me and Camille's self-promotion, we'll just say it's all down in the caption because it is. We won't bore Lucas by going through all of the ins and outs. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate your time. You're always welcome back. And yeah, if you ever want to come back, just drop us a message. Thanks everyone for listening. See ya.